All right, so as I stated previously, we're going to keep it cordial. I will do my best to make sure that everybody gets their full answer in. However, if you go way over our limitations of time, I will make sure that I will cut your mic off, and then you will be able to provide your answer either at closing or if we have rebuttals and other questions to be asked at that time, then you might be able to answer them there. But I'm going to do my best to try to give everybody an opportunity to answer as best as possible. So everybody will be asked every question. First response will be 3 minutes, randomly or predetermined answer order. Each candidate will also be allowed to do a follow-up or a rebuttal. That'll be 90 seconds, also in a random order. And then if needed, we might give it another 60 seconds, depending on how the answers go and what kind of topics are brought up. And then at the very end, I'll give everybody an opportunity to do a closing statement. Any questions? All right, we're going to go ahead and get our Facebook Live started. So give me one moment. All right, we are live on Facebook. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Good morning, everybody. We have the Illinois 6th District congressional candidates live with us today. We've got 3 candidates here. We've got Nikki Conforti, Rob Cruz, and Scott Casper, all live for our Illinois 6th District Republican debate. I am Erica Chang. I am with the Southland Journal. I am the editor-in-chief right now. And we are very happy to have you guys here with us today to talk about some of the issues that we're seeing here in the United States and what your thoughts and feelings are on those. So we are going to go ahead and get started. The candidates have all received the rules and format. It will follow a pretty standard format, basic, and I just ask that each candidate does keep it cordial. We will be asking all the questions to all of the candidates, and we will be giving each candidate an opportunity to rebut as well. So we're going to start with our first question here. The Congressional Budget Office released an economic outlook on Wednesday, saying high inflation will persist into the next year. The agency expects the consumer price index to rise 6.1% this year and 3.1% in 2023, which is well above the baseline of 2.3%. This is while China's consumer price index is estimated to be hovering at around 2.1%. How do you plan on addressing the incredible rise in inflation to protect U.S. taxpayers? I will start with you, Mr. Cruz.
First of all, thanks for having us today. Appreciate you guys taking the time and doing this so that we can have a discussion. For me, I think we got to break it down to its simplest form. We've created a supply chain issue that has now had less of the supply and more of the demand. One of those things that we have to do is, and I've said this in many of my speeches and many of my talks, is bring back these manufacturing plants that my father and grandfather used to work. It's actually a part of our mission statement. And what does that look like? Right now, we're operating at a negative loss in all of our trade deficits with China, with Mexico. Former President Trump mentions that all the time. He had a handle on this inflation issue and pushed it back into a tariff. So I don't think that we have to reinvent the wheel. I think we have to go back to what we were doing before. Personally, energy independence is obviously going to be a topic that we all talk about. How do we get to that point? I have a friend that works down in Houston. When they separate this oil, they get this cruddy oil back in, this real creamy, bad oil, and it shuts down their factories. The water usages become an issue. They need to get back to manufacturing oil in this part of the world, so we're not tankering it across the sea to create more pollution. So I think trade agreements need to be reorganized. I think energy independence. And then if we do bring back this manufacturing, because that's one thing inflation might do, is bring back manufacturing. So we've got to start working with our partners in organized labor to start creating the middle-class bedrock that can produce the stuff that we need here in America, like my dad did. My dad made soap for Ecolab and Limeaway. Everyone's heard of Limeaway. I made it too. So we need to come back to those types of situations as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. We will go to Nikki Conforti.
Thank you for having me. I'm an economics major from the University of Chicago, so inflation is something that I understand well. It was a phenomenon that was actually created by this administration. We didn't have to be in the position that we're in today. And now it's gone on for so long that it has infiltrated pretty much every aspect of the economy, from supply chain to labor force to even raw materials. So there is no silver bullet. Right now, the Fed, the typical way to address inflation is to raise interest rates. They called it transitory. It certainly wasn't. Even at the end of last year, when Yellen admitted that it wasn't transitory, it took her 5 months to act to begin to raise interest rates. And she did it at a level that was the highest in 20 years. And now they're talking about raising it again even higher. And so the problem with their inaction and where we are today is that it puts America on the brink of recession. It's a balancing act. So we need to act, and we need to act quickly. I have already been in conversations with people in Washington about ideas on how to address inflation and what we can do from a monetary standpoint and things in Congress to start to bring it down. So I do have a plan. If everything works well with my idea, we can even start to pay down the debt, which, as you know, is over 30 trillion right now. So that is probably one of the first things that I'm going to address, because inflation is a hidden tax on everybody, and it affects every aspect of our lives, and it's eating up our paychecks. And we have to really lower the cost of living for the American people again.
Thank you, Nikki. And finally, we have Scott Casper.
Hi, Erica.
Hello.
Thank you for having us here today. And I want to thank the Southland Journal for facilitating this forum. Thank you also to Nikki and Rob for being here today. I have to say, of all the candidates running in this race, Nikki and Rob have been wonderful candidates to run with. At the heart of inflation, and we have an inflation crisis right now, but at the heart of it is a spending problem. And it started during the pandemic. We did all this federal relief. Some of it was, I think, well-intentioned. Some of it, I think, was necessary. We for the first time in our country's history, we actually shut down businesses. If you think about that now, it's almost kind of absurd what we went through. But that created the supply chain problem. that created everything else. It's a domino effect. But at the heart of it, we have a spending problem, and we need to get that in line. The national debt is $30 trillion. It's an obscene amount of money that we're going to pass on to our children and their children, because it's not going to go away anytime soon. So in DC, my number one priority to address inflation is to address spending. We need to stop having these omnibus spending bills where we shove trillions of dollars through in the middle of the night, and it literally shows up in the middle of the night. These 3,000-4,000 page bills. Who knows what's in there? But we need to get back to actually creating a real budget and actually funding the programs that the federal government should fund, and maybe not funding those that it shouldn't be funding. Once we get the funding spending under control, many of these other things will fall into place. During the Trump administration, we experienced a really great economy, in large part because energy became very cheap during the Trump administration. And we do need to go back to getting cheap energy. We're seeing how it's just devastating families right now. Gas went up $1 in the last 10 days. Just think about that. It's a phenomenal thing what's going on at the gas pump. We're not far behind from Europe. What we need to do, it's really easy on that front. We need to turn those pipelines back on. We need to work on long-term green solutions, of course, but we can't destroy American families in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Casper. Now we will give everybody a chance to refine or rebut anybody. I'll start with you, Mr. Cruz.
Sure. One of the things I mentioned earlier, and Scott was right a little bit, that energy is the basis of everything. It affects the transportation of supply. It affects the transportation of goods. It raises prices on things like M&Ms when it has nothing to do with energy. But my question actually is for Nikki. She mentioned that she had a plan, and that I would like to hear what that plan is, to be honest with you.
So right now in Washington, Congress, as Scott pointed out, Congress presents bills and passes these astronomically large bills. And revenue comes in, and we know what the revenue is every year through tax collection. And right now there's no correlation. The difference between the two just simply gets put on the debt. So my plan is to build a correlation, build it over business cycles, and be able to curb spending, and when the economy is going strong, have excess revenues to even pay down the debt.
Thank you, Nikki. Do you have anything else to add?
I would just say, I'm an energy consultant. That's my day job today. So I understand the intricacies of the energy industry, and there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of ways, everybody talks about returning to energy independence. Yes, of course we need to do that. And there are a number of ways that we can address that through opening up the leases, through getting rid of old laws, through, the fracking. So I, again, have been in conversations with people in Washington about the development of legislation to begin to address these various issues and begin the return to energy independence. We have to end the war on oil and gas. Our producers are getting crushed. Some of them are experiencing bankruptcy. So it's a very serious issue. And the fact that Biden goes overseas to Saudi Arabia to try and have conversations and get them to supply our gas is outrageous. It's very un-American. And so we need to turn that around immediately.
Thank you. Scott?
I just have 2 points. One is unrelated. I'm at home with my kids. It's summer break now, and we have a puppy that's in the room next door. So if you hear any commotion, or if you see me pause my mic, you'll know why. The other reason, the other point I want to make is just a simple point. The 6th district is surrounded by energy production. And we have 2 nuclear reactors just to the south of us, and we have a giant refinery just to the southwest of us. It used to be the largest refinery capability in our country, and it's been throttled right now. because of the Biden administration's policies to limit the production of petroleum products. And not only does that impact our price at the pump, but it's impacting jobs, because so many of the people who work in these refineries and work at the nuclear reactors live in our district. They're the families that are here. Energy independence for me is a very personal thing, because I have a brother who works in the nuclear, who works in a nuclear reactor, not the two that are near us, but another one not too far away. And it's a very personal thing to see. So many people have been laid off in the last 18 months. And that right there is how we can solve so many of these problems, get these people back to work and get that production going.
Thank you very much. All right. I just have one follow-up question. This will be for all the candidates. We'll go in the same order that we did before. I believe all of you touched on the issue of the supply chain issues right now, and particularly the supply chain issues from products coming from overseas. Now, we all know that it might not be overnight. It definitely will not be overnight that we will be able to address those issues. But what ideas do you have in place to address some of these supply chain issues for products that we do receive overseas? I'll start with you, Rob.
For me, like I'm always a keep it simple kind of guy. It's made in the USA. We don't make a lot of the stuff that we use here. We don't make the toothpaste or the toilet paper. A lot of these things come from China or Indonesia or the Pacific Rim. And we've gotten addicted to a trade deal with the Far East that is now becoming an issue with us. You topple on COVID. Whenever they have a rash of COVID, they shut down their ports. We can't even get chips for new cars. I have friends in the car industry. They're making a factory, I think it's in Tennessee or Ohio, where they can make these chips. What has happened in this country is we've gotten away from making the stuff ourselves. Our grandparents and parents did not rely on anyone else to make the things that make the economy work here in America. We got addicted to foreign trade deals. We need a harsh turn. We need to add tariffs in there. We need fair trade, not free trade. We need to get these factories back up and running. We need our help with organized labor to start producing the things that we use on a regular basis in this country.
Thank you. Nikki?
Yes, the supply chain issue was created for a number of reasons. Number one, the labor problem that the country faced over the last year to 18 months. People just weren't showing up at the docks. Number two, the truckers were not able to use their trucks. A lot of their trucks were sidelined because they didn't meet California standards for emissions. And quite frankly, we do need to bring more of the manufacturing here. In pharma, we were dependent on China for a lot of our pharmaceuticals. We need to bring that back here. So, the way I plan to approach that is number two, to address the labor issue and get people back to work. I had my own small business and staffing for a number of years, so I understand the job market. I know what it takes to get people back to work. So that's number one. We need to get our workforce working. Number two, we do need to get our transportation, our logistics moving, and we need to again, address the energy issue. We need to look at the trucker situation, and we need to get things moving, and we need to bring the manufacturing back to the U.S. So there's a number of things that we need to address to solve that problem.
Thank you. And now Scott?
It is made in the USA that's going to save us. And that's the long-term plan. That has to be the goal. And it's manufacturing, certainly. It's also farming. It's also prescription drug production. All of that is happening in other places around the world. We get so much of our grain from the Ukraine. When we have, we're sitting in America's breadbasket. We get so many of our drugs from China, which could be a national security problem for us if China wants it to be. It's about bringing those jobs back here, certainly. It's also about dealing with our foreign competition. We need fair trade, and fair trade is more than just a dollars and cents sort of thing. It's also about the sort of countries that we're trading with. And China is the problem in so many ways. Number one, they don't respect our intellectual property laws. I'm an intellectual property lawyer. I have dealt with clients trying to stop the theft of their products in China. It's impossible. That has been the trade-off, though, to have things like Costco and Sam's Club, where we have warehouses full of cheap goods. And I think we as American consumers need to realize that that is not good for us long term. We need to look at our main streets, and we need to look at the small businesses here in America and do what's best in their best interests. We're not going to decouple from China overnight. It's going to have to be a long-term plan. We can immediately start to move production out of China and move it to other countries in Asia that are more fair to the United States. Vietnam is one of them, for instance. But the long-term plan has to be to bring things back to America. My grandfather had a manufacturing plant outside of Inglewood here in Chicago. That plant then got moved out to the suburbs and then eventually out of the state because it's too difficult to do business here. I wouldn't be surprised. We have no interest in that company anymore, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't get moved to Mexico or somewhere else before long. And that's what we need to address. Things need to be made here. Oh, Erica, your mic is
on mute.
There we go.
Thank you, Scott. Moving on. Next question. According to the Commonwealth Fund, the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, which pays for Medicare beneficiaries, hospital bills, and other services, is projected to become insolvent by 2028. How are you prepared to take up the issue in Washington, D.C. to ensure future solvency while limiting the burden on taxpayers? This time we will start with Nikki.
Thank you. Well, I certainly do not support Medicare for all. I think that will only exacerbate the issue with insolvency for the Medicare. Healthcare, it has been an issue across the country. Obamacare, the Accountable Care Act, failed. Within the first year, most of the insurance companies that had enrolled had pulled out, so that today that health plan also does not work. It is expensive and it doesn't provide access. So we really need to look at and take that system and evaluate it from an access, funding, and affordability standpoint. And those are the things, I have an MBA in healthcare, so that's an area that I'm very strong in. And people need to have access to affordable healthcare, but we cannot make it free for everybody. So we have to really take another hard look at that system nationwide and start to reevaluate it and reassess it. And we have to take a look at the insurance industry too and see how we can reformulate that. Maybe they need to start paying into it.
Thank you. Next, I have Scott.
The three of us are running for Congress, which is a federal position. It's the federal government. And it's my personal belief that the federal government really has no business being involved in healthcare. This is an issue that should be handled by the states and at the local level. Before Obamacare, we actually had really good insurance here in Illinois across most people's lives. That all got upended and changed with the implementation of Obamacare. I think many aspects of Obamacare were well-intentioned. It's just the execution of it turned into a crisis for many others. One of the problems with Obamacare and the way that we're handling insurance now is that we've put people all into sort of general risk categories. So you have a lot of healthy people and you have a lot of not so healthy people put in the same category. And the reason, I guess the intention behind that was to bring down the price for the people who need insurance the most by slightly raising the price for the healthier among us. Well-intentioned, but it just doesn't quite work that way. And so what we need to do is actually have accurate risk pools for people of the healthiest among us should be in certain lesser categories than the worst among us. And that's just the way that it kind of has to work. The other thing, we need competition across state lines among the insurance companies. The current Obamacare doesn't allow companies in Illinois to compete outside of Illinois. And that's how you actually spread that risk pool across the whole country to bring down prices for all.
Thank you, Scott. And then finally, we have Rob.
Yeah. So being a person here who's gone through the system as a patient, today's actually my anniversary, 11-year anniversary of my cancer diagnosis. So I went through it, from the bottom side of this avenue. For starters, Medicare is a very old system. There's a lot of new needs that have developed over technology and medicine and diagnosis. So I think there has to be a long look at how Medicare is being applied now as compared to when it first started. Number two, insolvency on Medicare is obviously a federal issue at the time, but I do agree, Scott, that it needs to be a state issue. This is one of those things that each state should be providing its healthcare system to its voters and constituents and its taxpayers, and that will base on what type of people move into your state. A one size fits all didn't work even when I was sick. Let me give you an example. We had a PPO because my wife worked at a really good law firm at the time. It's like having a VIP pass to the nightclub. You get everything you need, no questions asked. After she got let go from that job and we were going back for our checkups, I was on HMO. I was standing out in lines in the middle of the rain, trying to get inside a shelter. And the two differences were so dramatic to me that you have one type of plan based on whether you're employed or not, and another type of plan, whether you're a small business owner or unemployed or working, what they call gig jobs, and you're on HMO. So you get treated two different ways. I think we can do better than that. To be honest, the doctors under this plan saved my life. So I have nothing but admiration for them. But at the same time, I could see where other people that were in the rooms next to me that didn't have the coverage I had, it didn't work out for them. And it broke my heart. And it also, kind of made me focused on why I'm sitting here today. So, for Medicare, I think we need to revisit. It's an old car. It needs to, sorry, let me rephrase. It's an old house. It needs to be rehabbed. We need to update it to what's managed today. And then from a solvency state, we might want to push this back onto the states and allow them to run their own, healthcare organizations in their own states.
Thank you, Rob. All right, moving on. Right, my following question is, you have each decided to run as a Republican in the primary election this year. What stances do you have on current issues that set you apart from the traditional Republican platform? I'm going to start with you, Scott.
Of course, and actually, before I begin, Rob, congratulations. You said 11th anniversary today. Congratulations on that. I'm the only true conservative running in this race. And the people of this district, as I've been listening and talking with thousands of voters, they're demanding conservative solutions to get our country back on track. I carry the endorsement of the Illinois Family Institute as the pro-family, pro-life candidate in this race. One moment, I'm sorry about this. Sorry about that. So I carry the endorsement of the Illinois Family Institute as the pro-family, pro-life candidate in this race. And I also carry the endorsements of Mayor Rudy Giuliani, New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, and longtime former president of the Chicago FOP, Kevin Graham, as the pro-law and order candidate in the race. I carry the endorsements of former NRA president, longtime CPAC president David Keene as the pro-Second Amendment candidate in this race. I've also signed the Liberty Pledge. I carry the endorsement of the Illinois Freedom Caucus and its chair, State Representative Chris Miller, and numerous other activist groups such as Save Illinois as the pro-America First candidate in this race. But I think what sets me apart the most is I'm invested in this area and I'm here to fight for it. I don't want this job for the pension, the pay, or the perks. I am going to DC to serve the people. And I put my money where my mouth is. If elected, I will take only $37,306, the amount that many in our district are forced to live on. I won't take the full $174,000 salary. And I'm also for term limits. I've signed a pledge that I would serve no more than 3 terms.
Thank you, Scott. We're going to move on to Nikki.
you. I'm a strong conservative, and I do believe in traditional Republican values. You know, I'm pro-life. We need to be tough on crime, and we need to protect the kids. If there's, one area I think that that separates me from that, it's probably, I'm a little bit more open-minded to people's sexuality, and very accepting of people's choice in their sexual realm. That said, I don't agree with the sexualization movement that is occurring across the nation and affecting our children as young as 3 years old. If someone's an adult and they choose to transition, I think it's great. But don't force, the transition on 7 and 8 year olds when they haven't even gone through puberty. But so I still hold some strong, conservative values there as well. But again, I am very accepting of whatever people's choice. And I think that's one thing that we as a nation can really take from what has happened over the last 18 months, because there really is no going back. We have to continue to evolve as a nation and a country and become better. And I think having gone through what we have gone through as a nation, that we can all be more accepting and grow and be more accepting of each other.
Thank you. To follow up, I'm sorry. Never mind. I was moving too fast. All right, Rob?
Sure. Great question, right? What differentiates ourselves from other people in this race? So traditional conservative, values, obviously everyone's going to say that they have them. I've been talking about education since last year, when I was one of the guys who ran for a school board before it became the thing to do, and sat there in these school board administration hearings and going to ISB and having the IASB having a convention and listening to what the type of rhetoric and curriculum is coming down the pipeline here. I was on that boat before anyone even thought to get on that boat, because education of children is how you form the future society, and a future society is going to determine whether you last in an empire or not. Number two, safety. I'm the candidate here that's been endorsed by the real FOP, the one that runs the whole statewide and Lodge number 7. It's because I worked with them and talked to them about things like a project that they ran in Richmond called Exile, where the federal government started getting involved on a short-term basis to get guns off the streets and put kids away, or actually give kids other opportunities after they've been picked up. So I think education and safety are two non-traditional Republican things that I have stood strong with. I've been with Sheriff David Clark. I've been with John Catanzara. I've been with Ann Dorn, whose husband was murdered in St. Louis during the riots of 2020. And so to stay there, and for me personally, it's not about Republican or Democrat anymore. To me, it's about what are the issues that are plaguing the people that live in the 6th district, and how do we solve them? One of them's been education. The other one's been safety, and the last one's been jobs. I've been one of the only candidates to come out and talk about working with organized labor. In this neck of the woods, if you're not working with organized labor, you're not going to win in the general election. It's proven over time. The Republicans in the 90s were working with organized labor to get things done. We need to get back to being that problem-solving party instead of the party who wants to stand on a soapbox and tell you how to live.
Thank you, Rob. All right. So to follow up with that, Scott, do you have anything to add?
I'll just add that, to win this race in November, we need to build a consensus. We need to build a coalition across this whole district. My job as a lawyer has been to listen to my client, to listen to the other parties, and to come to a consensus and to reach a solution, the best solution possible for my client. And this is the sort of skills that I will bring, that prepared me for this moment, and I will bring to DC to build consensus among our district. We need to learn how to bring together conservatives in, all across our district. conservatives in Mount Greenwood and Beverly on the one end, conservatives in Milton Township and Downers Grove Township on the other end, and to bring them together. And you know, it takes people like me who can build consensus to do that. This is a game of addition. It's the only way that we can win in November.
All right, thank you. Nikki, something to add?
Yes, I would just say that I think all 6 candidates have strong positions on crime and education. And I think, and the economy. I think those are all issues that we share and we're pretty much on the same page on. We are all tough on crime. We all agree on that. We are all, against CRT and pro education for the kids. I mean, I've got ideas of how to start to turn around the education programs in our schools. And I've, again, talked to people in Washington over these topics because these are things that I'm serious about. These are things that I have a plan for, and I plan to take action when I get into Washington on energy, on the economy, and on education. We have to protect our kids. They are our future.
Thank you, Nikki. And Rob?
So, sorry, I hit the button twice. To follow up on that, I'll give you a story. We went to an Arab Chamber of Commerce meeting, met a lot of people, at least want to see who we were dealing with. The next day, Marie Newman decides she can't make an event, and they didn't call Sean Casten. They didn't call any of the other candidates in the 6th district on the Republican side. They called me. The reason why I asked them, why did you call me, is because of my strong stance on putting the children's safety and education first. These are the types of issues that are going to reach across race, culture, religion, is our kids. It's the one thing we care about most in the world, whether you are from India, Mexico, America, China, or anywhere else in the world. And seeing that all transpire, even through the Hispanic movement. I am the only Hispanic candidate in this race. And the waves of Latinos coming over, whether it's church functions or other different events that we're meeting people, it's the same thing. I can't believe they're allowing little kids, for example, in Illinois, to have an abortion without telling their moms or their dads. Our grandparents are shaking their heads right now with a chancla in their hand, ready to and willing to put some discipline down, because that's the thing that's going to move this race. I went back and looked at when was Illinois the last time Illinois voted for a Republican president. It was George Bush. He had 2.3 million votes. So it's not like something can't be done. And that was all it reached from Asians, Hispanics, Blacks, whites, every race and culture. I'm the candidate that right now can pull those things together, because it's not about Republican or Democrat. It's about the issues. And that's the one thing I've been screaming since day one.
Thank you very much, Rob. I have a follow-up for all the candidates. We talked a little bit about reaching across party lines and moving together on one accord. How do you think that factors in, and how do you plan on being able to reach across the party lines, working with Democrats or liberals, and of course, working with one another and other fellow Republicans in Congress to make sure that America moves forward on one accord? I'll start with you, Scott.
Sure. There's kind of a misnomer that to work across party lines means that you have to compromise, you have to sacrifice your own beliefs or your positions. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the most important part of working across party lines is to work civilly with one another, to treat each other with respect, to listen to ideas, and to allow yourself to hear the whole story, the whole argument, and to make an informed decision. And this is really, as a lawyer the last 20 years, this is a large part of what my job has been, is to hear all the evidence and to come up with a solution that's going to work for everyone. In Congress, there's a lot of things that I think that we need to say no to. There's a lot of things, certainly the budget is something we need to say no to. Certainly some of these very progressive programs like CRT, we need to say no to. But there's a lot of things that we can say yes to, and we can work together in a bipartisan way to reach a solution that benefits all. And at the heart of that is things like education. It is things like job opportunities. and bringing jobs back to America and making made in the USA our long-term strategy for success. Oh, Erica, you're muted again.
Sorry, Nikki.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that Congress has been very polarized over the last couple of years. So there is work to be done. But for me, what I've done over my vast career is I've done a lot of contract negotiation. So I'm a very skilled negotiator. A lot of that it entails communication, opening up the lines of communication, reaching out, listening to what they have to say, identifying where you are on the same page and where you aren't, and start to chip away at coming together and moving forward. What we want to avoid, I think all of us want to avoid, is the flip-flopping from administration to administration, the pendulum swing. The only way to move this country forward is through the middle. And the only way to do that is really to communicate and to work together. And I think the nation wants that. I think the people want that. And so that's what we need to find.
Thank you, Nikki. I have one more follow-up. Rob, you mentioned something very interesting when talking about your stances as a Republican and essentially being—
Excuse me, Erica, did Rob have a chance to answer that question?
Yes, I'm about to address that.
Okay.
Essentially being pro-union. So when you give your rebuttal, would you be able to talk about that as well? And then I would also like to hear from the other candidates.
So the question is what again? Let me I'm clear.
If you could expand on what you had said earlier about being pro-union.
Right. So my dad when we grew up, my dad worked for Teamster 770. It allowed him to keep a job that put me into, schools that I could perform in. I ended up at Providence Catholic because of it. And it was a protection against employer abuse. The reason why I bring back organized labor is because when factories start to leave and factories are gone, the organized labor section starts to hurt. Organized labor has been the bedrock of this state for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive. And as it's deteriorated over time, manufacturing starts to leave. I think there's got to be find a way for commonality between the business owner, organized labor, and government to resume what we had going in the 90s, which was, we had record low inflations. Everybody had a job. Everybody seemed to be happy and moving forward. Back to your question about working with across the aisle, being in, I relate a lot of things back to sports. Growing up in a sports environment, in a sports home, we didn't play for the name on the back of the jersey. We played for the name on the front of the jersey. And the front of the jersey in this situation is America. Are we Americans? Do we want to put what's in our best interest first? And the most common denominator, and I will harp this until this election is over, is our kids. We can all disagree on every single thing. We all show up to a park and we want our kids to get along, have fun, and be safe. So if we start with the effort and the mindset that we're going to put our kids first, you'll start seeing more, not saying it's necessarily compromising, but more willingness to work together to make sure that this world is better than the way we left it.
Thank you, Rob. Scott, anything about the unions?
Absolutely. I want to make really clear that I am 100% pro-labor. I think unions, the trades unions have a place in our world. You look back, my mother's grandfather, my great grandfather, was a judge. He lived in Beverly. He was a judge for 24 years. And I was looking at some of his campaign materials, very fascinating materials from the 30s and 40s and 50s. And, they were like a litany of all the trade unions that supported him. And you just don't see that with Republicans today. And there's reasons for that. But, the Republicans used to be the party of labor, and we need to get back to being the party of labor. And in this district, it's incredibly important because we have so many hardworking men and women and families who are connected with the working trades. Both my brothers are in unions. I mentioned one brother's in the nuclear reactor. The other brother works for the Union Pacific. And, those unions have been very important to ensuring that they have safe workplaces and that they're being paid fairly. So much of the problem that Republicans think they have with unions is actually problems with the leadership of the unions. And there's no doubt that the leadership of especially the government unions and the teachers unions, are problematic. But, I am a pro-labor candidate, and in Congress, I intend to work with the working trades unions for the betterment of everyone. And I do want to take a moment to just point out that there are two candidates now, or I guess three candidates now on the call, but there's two mayors now on the call. And one of them has been notoriously anti-labor and anti-union. And I think that that's a consideration that many people need to look at when they go to vote for one of us on June 28th.
Thank you, Scott. Nikki?
Yes, unions have been a big part of America, and they play a very important role. And I'm very pro-worker and pro-union. I don't intend to take anything away from the unions. There's a lot of work to be done across this country to improve the infrastructure, to get, energy back online and, the supply chain going again. And unions play a big part of each and every part of that. And so, I am definitely pro-American worker and pro-union.
Thank you, Nikki. And Rob, do you have anything else to add on that?
I'm going to couple back a little bit on what Scott said. We do have two mayors who didn't make the call today, which is disappointing. I think people should hold them accountable for that. And one of them is big time anti-union. The mayor of Orland Park has been on record saying he's not a union guy. And I don't know how anyone can think that they're going to win a race in a general election in Illinois' 6th congressional district without some union support. So I think we've got to bury the hatchet when it comes to that, start reaching out and figuring out how we can correlate business owners, union, and government in the same boat.
Thank you very much, everybody. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. On Sunday, senators unveiled a bipartisan agreement on principle for gun safety legislation. Among other things, the agreement had provisions to provide major investments to mental health programs, suicide prevention programs, crisis intervention, and recovery services. What are your thoughts on this legislation, and particularly the mental health components? I'm going to start with you, Rob, at this time.
So you can go back and look in our articles. You go back in December of last year, I was sitting on a school board, sent out a press release saying that our kids right now are under so much mental health stress that we need to solve this issue at the local level. And we had at Oak Lawn High School, we had over 242 kids come in on a survey saying they've thought about committing suicide, when the prior year before COVID, it was 20. So that's a 10x number. When I read that number, the previous meeting, I reached out to our school board members and said, how can we figure this out? Coming from, the east side of Joliet, we see a lot of mental health issues in people that are walking around. Some of it is hereditary. Some of it is drug and alcohol abuse. Today, these days, when I was on the school board, we had kids smoking vape pens. 500 kids got caught smoking vape pens in Oak Lawn High School. So it's a contributing factor to this. So what I would do is I'd like to see the federal government initiate guidelines to help local and support local governments. Because what's more personal than providing the resources to your favorite counselor or your favorite teacher or your favorite coach to discuss what's going on in your head? Because you're not going to want to talk to a stranger. You're going to want to talk to someone that you trust. So from a gun standpoint, I also think we need to start having a little parental consent on when 18-year-old kids want to buy our firearms. You can't carry a firearm. You can't FOID and conceal carry a firearm until you're 21 years old. And I think the same thing goes for abortion, but that's another topic. So I would love to get more parents involved. I would like to start creating, and this isn't something you can legislate. This is something that you have to advocate more parents' involvement in government, in schools, and how our society is being run. I think that's a key component to this bill.
Thank you, Rob. Next, I've got Scott.
Let me start off by saying, I am pro Second Amendment, and I don't think that there should be any more restrictions on the Second Amendment. I do carry the endorsement of the former NRA president, David Keene. Because here's the thing: if you outlaw weapons, and we've seen this happen in other countries such as England, the United Kingdom, if you outlaw handguns, people will use other weapons. They'll use kitchen knives, because it's not the actual weapon that's the problem. They don't get up out on their own. They need an actor in order to carry out the horrific crime. And that actor, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, Erica. So many, if you look at these mass shootings, so many times, it's people who have mental health problems. It's usually people who've cried out for help. It's really never the case where it's a person who's has a family and a job. It's usually always the case where it's someone who's become a lone ranger. They've gone off on their own. They've become and they suffer from some sort of mental health problem. And we do need to address the mental health crisis. It's exploded in the last couple of years because of, I believe, because of the government's response to the pandemic. We forced kids and people to live, separately and not have that social interaction. And for some children, and particularly our teenagers, that's had a devastating impact. Teen suicide is never been higher than right now. And it's very troubling to me as a parent of a teenager. And, we look at, how do you address that? Well, I think we need to make that the focus. We need to look at providing mental health resources. And these are things that we should be providing at the state and local level, but it's things we should be providing to make sure that, that people have the help they need so that they don't carry out horrible crimes in acts of desperation.
Thank you, Scott. Nikki?
Yes, mental health is a local issue, and it has become an epidemic, and it needs support from the federal government, but it needs the funding to make sure it gets to the end point. Right now, there are so many agencies and so many layers that take a piece of all funding. So we really have to take a look at how the money from the federal government is spent and allocated, and make sure that money gets to the local level. We also have to take a look at the drug problem that is sweeping our youth, because it also is becoming an epidemic. And that in part is a contributing factor to some mental health. So we really need to attack this from a number of different aspects, because there is no single bullet. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. It was good to see some mental health legislation, be agreed upon. I also think we need to go after the gun traffickers and attack, the Second Amendment. I really don't think there should be any further infringements on, because I think it's a gateway to the First Amendment, and it sets precedent and opens the door. And then it puts all our rights at stake. And we're already seeing our First Amendment being infringed upon. So I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And, studies have shown, Chicago has some of the strongest gun legislation in the country. California also has some of the strongest gun legislation in the country. But between these two states, their shootings and crime is through the roof. So it's, strengthening gun control only hurts the law-abiding citizen. It doesn't go after the criminal. And so we need to start going after the criminal. We need to go after the gun traffickers. A lot of guns are coming in over the border. We need to shut the border down. We need to address access and start to recapture a lot of those guns. because that, so there is no one answer to this question, because it's a very complicated issue that we've been dealing with for many years. And so there is no, one solution, but we need to go after the criminals. We need to help our kids on the mental health. We need to give them access and that are safe in order to come forward. And we also need to address the drug issue.
Thank you, Nikki. Rob, any follow-up?
Yeah, sure. I'll make it short and sweet. I promise. The layered government is an issue, right? Yeah, a leaky bucket, or carrying a bucket's always going to have a few leaks in it. But in Illinois, it's more like half the bucket gets leaked out before anything gets done. That does have to change. Gun laws, like Nikki said, huge, big, strong gun laws in Illinois and California are irrelevant if they're not enforced. It's that simple. You can have every law in the book if you choose not to enforce them. That's the issue, which is why I researched the Project Like Exile, which intermingled government agencies, federal government. One of the things I always hear Lori Lightfoot say, kids are bringing the guns across the border from Indiana. Well, under Exile, if you picked up one of those kids, he's going to jail for 5 years. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because that's the minimum sentence of having an unregistered illegal firearm in your possession. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. You just have to start enforcing the rules like they did in Virginia and watch crime deteriorate by 60% like it did there. It also happened in Atlanta, called Phase 5. So those are two things right there. We have the solutions. We don't have the courage to enact them.
Thank you, Rob. Scott?
Sure, I'll just say, we have the laws on the books. We do need to enforce them. And that's actually, we need to enforce all the laws here in Chicagoland. We have a crisis really where we have a prosecutor, Kim Fox, who is not enforcing many of the laws, and that's causing crime all across the board to increase. There are 300 million guns in this country, at least that we know of, perhaps more. So getting rid of the guns, not only is it kind of the shiny coin that the leftist Democrats are holding before us, but it's an impossibility. What we need to do is enforce the laws, and we need to treat people who have, mental health illnesses, drug addictions, and so forth. I set up a public safety task force. It's chaired by former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, who was police commissioner on 9/11. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how you address this issue, actually is securing our borders, and particularly our southern border, because so much of the illegal guns that wind up in Chicago and in the suburbs are coming across that southern border. They're originating from places like China, coming in through Mexico, and they're ultimately ending up in Chicago in the wrong hands. And why is that? It's a lot of it's gang activity. A lot of it's the gun trafficking is what fuels a lot of the gang activity, along with other sort of drug trafficking, human trafficking. But if we secure our border and we enforce our laws, we can bring down crime all across the region, but we can particularly bring down the instances of illegal guns in the wrong hands of people.
Thank you, Scott. And Nikki, any follow-up?
Yes, I would just say that we have to take action to protect our kids and our children at school. We send our kids to school and trust that they will be safe. And more, that's not the case. So we have to look at ways to address that issue. Why are shooters going to, junior highs and high schools and even universities? Because they're soft targets. So we have to find ways to harden them, to and some of the answers to that are controversial. So we need to work through that. But there are things that we can do, like cameras, single point of entry. There are different things, training that we can do. So we really need to start moving forward and taking action on protecting our kids when they go to school.
Thank you, Nikki.
And I would just add to that, we do need to be tough on crime with the criminals. These soft on crime policies that are coming out of Chicago, Cook County, and Lake County are hurting the whole state. And so we need to start to be tough on crime. Once we get the criminals in the correction centers we need to establish programs to rehabilitate them, and so that when they are turned back into society, it's not a repeat.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up with this question. First, everybody mentioned in their responses that the funding needs to be funneled properly through federal, state, and local levels. Can everybody kind of expand on their thoughts on how to ensure that the funding, especially for the mental health component of this legislation or proposed legislation, what their thoughts and what their processes would be like if they were involved in this? I'll start with you, Rob.
Sure. I think that's the design and the job of being the rep is to follow that type of transaction. Where did the money go? Who used it? How did they use it? How was it applied? Report back so that we can share with the rest of the people out there what happened with this. I don't think we see that enough here, especially in this state where we have supermajority Democrats. They kind of all give each other a pass and allow each other to just kind of go with the flow and go with the wind. And then they go out and tout how well that they're, that they've spent the money and this and that and the other. So I think detailed follow-up, detailed reports based on, your job as the rep is to, you bring in money to the district. You want to see the impact. You want to see, what happened, what worked, what didn't work. Because let's be honest, and sometimes people up here in this position are just telling you what you want to hear. Not all of it's going to work. Sometimes it's not going to work. And we have to understand why, instead of making excuses and saying it was somebody else's fault. Because if we're getting down to the nitty gritty and we're here to help these kids, we got to be honest. And if something ain't working, we got to stop doing it.
Thank you. Scott?
Erica, I love this question because it gets to the heart of a lot of issues that I have with the federal government and with funding any sort of program, which is why I'm in favor of this being an issue that's handled at the state level and the local levels, where there will be more accountability in the process. The federal government, and we can look at other examples as proof, but the federal government, there's too many opportunities along the way in that process for the money to be diverted for the wrong reason, to go to special interests, to go to political interests. Look at how we fund education at the federal level. Congress actually writes grants to specific districts for specific purposes. And you think that would actually be the way to handle this so that the money actually gets to those districts and is used for those purposes. But then every step of the way, those intentions get thwarted, including up to the step where the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has the ability to completely rewrite those grants, which is ludicrous, which is why the money never actually goes where it was intended to go. So I'm concerned that the same thing would happen with this proposed legislation, where it starts off very well intentioned with grants going to specific purposes in specific places, but then getting rerouted along the way and not being used at all for that. How we can handle that, though, in Congress is Congress actually needs to do its job and do the budgeting process the right way, which means starting that process in the committee level where bipartisan, both sides can weigh in on everything that's being funded, and you build the budget from the ground up as opposed to from the top down. I think that's one way that we can make sure that there is that accountability in the process.
Thank you, Scott. And Nikki?
Yes, I believe transparency is going to be the key. I mean, we need to monitor, and you can't monitor without knowing, where it's going. So we need to put a tracker on the funds, and we need to have accountability, and we need to have reporting on exactly, where the money was allocated, who's got and how it was used. And, we need to establish benchmarks prior and after so that we can evaluate how effective the funding was. And then from there, we can determine whether we need to give more funding or not. So it's all about, understanding how the money is spent. And I think that's an area that is really overlooked in Congress today. Congress is more concerned with spending and they're caught up in how much they want to spend and where it's going to be spent. But once they make that determination, I don't think there's a lot of follow-up to understand how the money is being allocated and spent and how effective it is. So I think that's a big part that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Nikki. And I do have one more follow-up question on this. This one has garnered some good responses and good thought. Nikki, you stated earlier that schools are being targeted, elementary, middle, high, even colleges, that they're being targeted as soft targets. They're easy to get to, easy to cause mayhem, essentially. What policies and guidelines would you like to see to reinforce the safety of some of these soft targets? And I'll let you go first, Nikki.
Thank you. I believe in hardening the schools. You know, I believe if, and like I said, some of these answers are a little bit controversial. Not everybody's going to like it, but we need to put cameras around schools. We need to lock the schools. We need to have single point of entry. We need to have firearms on the schools. We need to reinstitute our resource officers on campuses and have a police officer on campus. You know, part of it, which we had, but a big push in the defunding the police was to remove the resource officers from a lot of schools and go with more social programs. But that does nothing to protect our kids against an active shooter. You know, for those teachers that want to train and learn how to, you know, work a firearm, they should be given that right. And they should be allowed to, you know, protect the children with force if need be, if someone breaks into the schools.
Thank you, Nikki. And now Rob.
I like to use examples of what we've experienced in questions like this. My daughter went to hometown grade school, elementary. Once the school bell rang, there was one single point of entry. And you had to come through a camera, you had to sign in, you had to have an ID, you had to be registered, and you had to wait in the hallway until your student was allowed to come in. I thought, I always told my wife I felt the most secure in that scenario. When you hear about this kid, teachers letting them in and all these, doors are wide open, hospitals are another one. No one even talks about that. And hospitals are another point of entry issue. So point of entry is huge because if you can't get inside, you can't do the crime. So I commend, as I've criticized in the past some of our school districts, I will commend the hometown elementary for the way that they did it. And I felt like that would be something that would work all over the country.
Thank you, Rob. And Scott?
Our schools in Illinois are gun-free zones, which sounds nice, right? It sounds right. But what does that actually mean? It means that if you have a concealed carry permit, you can't actually bring your concealed carry weapon into a school. Now, again, that sounds ideal in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world, of course. And there's been studies that show that those who are wanting to commit some sort of mass shooting, those who are mentally depraved or just evil, who have a firearm, oftentimes an illegal firearm, they pursue gun-free zones to carry out their mayhem. And the reason is simple. You can maximize the carnage without return fire. What I'm in favor of is two things. Number one, if you have a concealed carry permit in the state of Illinois, that means you've gone through background checks and you've gone through training, and you should be able to conceal carry in our schools. And that includes our teachers if they've gone through that requirement and if they so desire to do so. Second, I'm in favor of putting a police officer in every school in the state of Illinois. And here's why. Our police officers are trained on how to handle crisis situations. They're trained on how to confront people, and they're trained on how to use a weapon and use it properly. And maybe it won't always be perfect, but it's going to be better than what we have right now for sure. And that's the way that we make our schools less of a target for these devastating situations that we see playing out across the country from time to time.
Thank you, Scott. All right. So I guess I'll leave this question alone. We could go on and on about this all day long. All right. I have one final question today for everybody. And this final question touches on immigration. What are your thoughts on America's immigration policy? Do you believe America's immigration policy needs to be reformed? If so, how? If not, why not? And I would particularly like for you guys to touch on the DREAM Act and your thoughts on that. This time I'm going to start with you, Scott.
Sure. So we have the immigration laws on the books. They've been there the whole time. We've just chosen not to enforce them, and we're not enforcing them in a very alarming fashion right now. And we've actually put back on the books these sort of catch and release programs where you're catching criminals at the border and then you're releasing them back into our country, and giving them a date 6 months out when they're supposed to show up for court, which of course they won't do. So we need to just enforce our immigration laws. I am a proponent of strengthening our southern border. There was a wall that was largely built. I am in favor of completing that project. But just because you have a big wall at the southern border doesn't mean you can't also have big gates to allow people to come through legally. My father escaped a communist country. He and his siblings grew up in Latvia. They escaped communism. They came here to this district, and it was a process that took 5 years because they had to go through the immigration laws, and they had to satisfy certain requirements. And once those required, they were allowed into this country. And my father is a citizen today. And we need to reward that sort of people who follow the law and go through the process. With respect to the dreamers, there's going to be no, let's just say there's going to be no fair outcome. That's a situation that was created by a loophole, what I believe to be an illegal executive order by President Obama. And we now have this situation where you have people that are in some sort of limbo. What I would like to do is to work on solutions for them so that they can become legal citizens. But at the end of the day, we need to enforce our immigration laws, and we need to, because if we don't secure our borders and enforce our immigration laws, ultimately we will have no country.
Thank you, Scott. Nikki?
Thank you. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. My grandfather came through Ellis Island and brought my mother here when she was a child. So I'm a product of immigration. So of course, I totally support immigration. I think that's what has made America so great. But there's a process, and the process needs to be followed, and it needs to be followed legally. What is happening at the southern border is a crisis. And now people from around the world are coming through the southern border, bringing violence, bringing assassination plans, bringing drugs and human trafficking. And so we definitely need to end the open border policy on the southern border. Our immigration policy as a whole, it is cumbersome. It's been around, for probably over a century. The visa, we have probably about 35 visas that are active on the books, and they're used well, and I support that. What I would like to see improved is the efficiency in the process. I know there's frustration in those that do follow the process legally, that it can take sometimes 10 years for them to attain citizenship. I think we need to shrink that timetable, and certainly in half, if not more. While the DREAM Act, I think it was well-intentioned, and while I may have supported it in the past, given what has happened at the southern border and the sheer number, the millions of people that have come in illegally, I'm not a supporter of the DREAM Act any longer because of the open border. Now that might change if the border changes and things are addressed. People should have an opportunity to come here legally and to achieve the American dream for themselves and to bring their families. But there's a process to be followed. And a country that doesn't have borders is truly not a country, and we have to protect our country.
Thank you, Nikki. And now Rob.
for starters, when you do the research on this, and it's something that hits a little bit close to home, being Hispanic, you hear a lot about these stories. For starters, universities have no known liabilities for allowing foreign exchange students to come to school and then they can vanish in thin air. They collect exuberant amount of tuition and then they can poof, be gone. I think that needs to change for starters. Two, the resources we have at the border are dated. They've got ferries that are still crossing the Rio Grande River in Texas down by McAllen. I know this because that's where my mother-in-law is from. And from a visa waiver perspective, overall, there's 185. It's way too many. We've got to shrink down that process. We live in a modern world. We're actually having a meeting right now, in a Zoom, and we're still handing out paper to people and asking them to come back for your hearing and stamping it like it's 1922 again, where my grandma came over for the first time. It's kind of ridiculous for the American culture to be handling it this way. Legal permanent residents, I think their timeframes need to be shortened. And I think we have to figure out a way economically to cap what they have to go through the process and spend, because we want people who want to come here and contribute. The old adage is bring me your poor, your suffering. And that's America's bedrock, is immigrants coming here, fleeing oppression, fleeing persecution, and wanting to be a part of a new society that doesn't place where they were born and what families they were born to make their way in the world. And legal permanent residents who come here and pay their taxes in a timely fashion. I'd like to introduce something that's called pay to stay. You pay your taxes, you do everything right, you don't get in trouble. Welcome to America. You're the kind of person that we're looking for, whether you're from Mexico, an Arab country, Asian, wherever, Europe. And lastly, we have to revise the refugee and asylum seekers rules. If you get awarded an asylum, it takes you 1 year then to become a citizen, while other people are doing it on breaking their backs, working in jobs that nobody wants to do to get here. And one person has a good name from a different foreign country and he gets to seek asylum. That ain't fair. So those are a few items I'd represent, but this is a huge issue. And then back to DACA. I don't think there's going to be a winning outcome. I think we need to embrace these people as Americans, bring them into the fold. If you've committed crimes or whatnot, we will send you back. There will be a disciplinary action to you misbehaving. But if you're a contributor and you want to be here and you're being positive, I don't see why you can't come.
Thank you, Rob. Any follow-up, Scott?
I'll just reiterate that, that we do want a healthy immigration system, because America has become the best technological leader in this world, and really the best at everything, because we have sought out talent all across the world. And we have been a place where people come to escape oppression. And certainly that is the case for my father and his family, who escaped, communist Soviet Union to come here. By all definitions, my father's lived the American dream, and so have I, as a result of that sacrifice. But as with so many things that we've discussed today, I believe in enforcing the law, and that includes enforcing the immigration laws.
Thank you, Scott. Nikki, any follow-up?
Yes, I worked many years in the job market staffing and brought foreign workers through the immigration process, worked with immigration attorneys, worked with H-1B visas and other forms of visas. And to my knowledge, there's less than 50 visas. So I'm just wondering where Rob got the information that there's 180 visas.
Rob, would you like to answer that, and any follow-up?
Just researching it on different websites and government sites, there actually is 185 of them that are known. We don't use them all. Because even if you look at different visas in the north, if you come through a visa waiver country, all you got to have is a passport. They count that as a visa. So we don't use them all, but there are that many.
Anything else you'd like to add, Nikki?
No, that answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And anything else you'd like to add, Rob?
Not at this time.
All right. And now I have one more follow-up question. The Trump administration has taken a lot of blame for lowering the number of immigrants that were allowed into the country while he was in office. And a lot of folks, particularly liberals, are blaming it on the labor shortage. Given that we were talking about supply chain issues and all that earlier in this meeting, I would like to have your thoughts on that. I'll start with you, Scott.
Yeah, my understanding of why the Trump administration lowered some of those numbers was because we have a border crisis, and the thought was we need to get our border secured, and that's a process that takes several years. In the meantime, we need to better control who's coming in and out of our country and who's traveling across the borders. I think I think it's really unfortunate that the Democrats go to such great lengths to blame the current problems today on the last administration. This is nothing new. Every administration always has blamed the last administration. The problems that are going on right now with the supply chain crisis, with inflation, were created by this administration, and they were created on day one, literally day one, when President Biden signed one of his first executive orders was to stop building the Keystone XL pipeline and to stop many of the other pipeline projects and to terminate leases of other pipelines. And that's what immediately put our fuel in a crunch. And that's immediately what has caused a domino effect in so many other ways of our supply chain. And, so I don't think it has anything to do with the immigration policies of the Trump administration. Oh, Erica, you're on mute still.
I keep doing that. Nikki?
The labor shortage really was a pandemic phenomenon. I don't think it had any correlation to any immigration policies or limitations. It was a result from my knowledge and from what I've seen in the data, it was a direct result of, people getting checks and high unemployment that in many cases were more lucrative than their hourly paid job. And so they didn't want to return to work. They chose to stay home. So I think a labor shortage was a direct result of this current administration's policies and handling of the pandemic. And it hurt businesses. And many businesses had to close as a result. And here in the state, nearly 50% of our population are employed by small business. And so we need to prop up small business and support them and reduce the legislation and regulations that will do harm to our small businesses. We need to support them in every way we can.
Thank you, Nikki. And Rob.
I'll start with the labor shortage thing. So when you talk to a lot of these guys that are working in public or private sector unions or even small businesses, a lot of older people were offered early retirement during this time frame of COVID. So, people that would not necessarily get retirement were offered settlements so they can keep money in pensions, to keep money flowing into the next generation. And then what didn't happen after that is we didn't have enough younger people to fill those jobs or have the skills to fill those jobs because we were too busy teaching them French literature instead of teaching them how to, weld a pipe together for your plumbing, or a drain. And so that's two factors there from the border crisis that the left claims. The minute that Biden was announced to be president, there were reports of thousands of people walking from South America to Mexico who knew that it was going to be open season on the border. When Trump was around, he was keeping resources there to make sure that the people coming in were properly documented. Anyone will tell you, even in the Hispanic community, we want to know who's coming over here. We need to know who they are, where they're from, and what's their intentions. Because you do get drugs, crime, all kinds of different criminal aspects to it. So I think what Trump was doing at the time was just kind of following what the immigration process was supposed to be. And this administration villainized it and decided everyone can come for free. And now we're being overrun. And we took the resources of that border and now it's in Ukraine.
All right, thank you very much, Rob. That concludes the questions that I have prepared for everybody today. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to come and join me on Zoom. I really enjoyed myself. I really enjoyed everybody's answers and finding more about where you guys stand. I hope this provides a little bit more clarity to everybody, given that the election is right around the corner, on who the best candidate is to represent them. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed yourselves as well. At this time, I'd like to give everybody just a couple of minutes to make any closing statements if you feel you need to do that. And I will start with Nikki today.
Thank you. You know, yes, the election is 2 weeks out, June 28th, and it's a critical election because on that day, you'll get to exercise your right to vote and choose the candidate that will go up against the Democrat in November. And so, of course, we want to take back this district and start to turn this country back around. And it starts at the polls and choosing the right candidate that will beat the Democrat in November. And I believe I am that candidate. You know, I'm not a politician. I'm really just one of us. I don't like what's going on, and I'm willing to go and fight. I believe I'm well qualified. Today, you heard that I have experience in the energy field and healthcare, with small business, with the job market and the economy. And so what does all that mean to you? It means that when I'm in Washington working on your behalf and legislation comes across my desk, I can make better decisions that will benefit the people of this district. And I'm an energy consultant. You know, I can go up against the Democrat toe to toe and win. So I ask for your vote on June 28th. Vote for Nikki Conforti for District 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Rob?
Thanks for having us again today. I also want to thank Nikki and Scott for being here. I'm pretty disappointed that the mayors aren't here. I don't understand, they're in a little bit of a feud themselves. And I think they should have came on here to explain what they're trying to do to each other. And I don't think it's fair that they're not here because people want to hear from them as well. It's kind of the same old Illinois politics, and we're getting tired of it. And if you're getting tired of it like I am, then join our mission, because our mission is simple. It's the safety and education of our children while we work our tails off to bring back the jobs that our parents and grandparents used to create the strongest middle class in the Midwest here, because Chicago is a world-class city, and right now it's not acting like one. And as a representative in the 6th district, I will make sure that we put your kids first. We'll make sure that they are safe, which is why we were endorsed by the FOP. We will put education at the forefront. I will request a seat on the Education and Labor Committee so that we can start gutting this national sex education standard, reduce standardized testing, and allow local places to train the student body the way that their markets see fit. And then lastly, when it comes to jobs, we need a Congress that's going to step in there, make legislation to stop all of these executive orders, whether it's left or right, and create a platform for job growth. If we don't do that, we will always be subject to a third world country's supply chain issues, and it'll never go away. So if you're ready to choose education, you're ready to choose safety, and you're ready to choose jobs, then on June 28th, you're ready to choose Cruz.
Thank you, Rob. And finally, I've got you, Scott.
First, I want to thank you, Erica, and the Southland Journal for facilitating this forum. I also want to thank Rob and Nikki for participating. I'm Scott Casper. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm a lawyer. I'm a father of 2, a husband of 15 years. And I'm a product of the wonderful and distinct communities here in the 6th district. My mother's family lived in Beverly for 4 generations. My great-great-grandfather was a founder of Inglewood. My father escaped communism, fled the Soviet Union, came here to this district and raised my family. We have a real opportunity here in the 6th district to take back this seat and to make a real difference in the lives of the hardworking men, women, the families of the 6th district. But to win this seat in November, we need to nominate the right candidate, because if we send the wrong candidate forward, we surely will squander this opportunity. Here's why I'm the right candidate. One, I've spent the past 2 decades traveling to DC for work, working on presidential and federal campaigns, including George W. Bush's campaign and Donald J. Trump's campaign. DC is a swamp. but I know the boundaries. I know who's good. I certainly know, and more importantly, who's bad. And when I go to DC, I'll hit the ground running, and I'm not going to fall in the swamp face forward like I fear some of those mayors may. Two, I'm the only conservative candidate running in this race, and the people of this district are really demanding conservative solutions to get our country back on track. I mentioned before, I carry the endorsements of Illinois Family Institute, the endorsements of Rudy Giuliani, Bernard Kerik, Kevin Graham, as well as several others. Three, I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a small business owner. I'm a lifelong resident of this area. I'm invested in this area, and I'm here to fight for it. The easy thing would be to run, to move out of Illinois, but I'm here to fight for it because Illinois is worth fighting for. If elected, I'm not going there for the pay, the pension, the perks. I'm going there to serve our people and to do what's best to make this area prosperous and safe again. And as I mentioned before, if elected, I'll take only $37,306, not the full $174,000 salary. And the reason is simple, because I don't want that to be influencing how I vote and how I fight for our people. Last, I'm a consensus builder. My job as a lawyer has been to listen to my clients and to fight for them. In DC, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to listen to my constituents, and I'm going to fight for our best interests. It's bringing people together. It's a game of addition, and that's the only way that we can win in November. I'm Scott Casper, and if you share in my vision for a prosperous, safe 6th district, then I ask for your support and I ask for your vote on June 28th or now during early voting. To learn more about me, please visit my website. It's casperforcongress.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I really enjoyed myself today. I hope that our viewers enjoyed themselves as well. And thank you very much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules to come and talk with us. I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope everybody stays cool. It is a scorcher out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.